Okay, so we drove to the hospital, and I remember at this point when we're driving to the hospital, I was like dreading the next contraction. They were so consistent for like hours, and they were really painful now, like really painful, where I had to grip onto something and I was holding onto the car, and I knew I kept looking at the clock. I'm like, cool, in like 1 minute I'm gonna have a painful contraction. So I had one in the hospital's only 5 minutes away, so I had one in the car, and I was like, oh my god, it was so painful. My mom had to park the car, so I had to get out and walk up to the center by myself. I went up there. It's so awkward when you go up to the front desk because everyone's so like relaxed and whatever, and I have to go up there and be like, I'm in labor, because they're looking at you like, why are you here? Um, so I went up and I told them I was in labor. And since I was there for false labor before, I didn't have to do like the check-in paperwork or whatever because they already had that. So they put me in a room, and the nurse came and she checked me, and I was 1.5 centimeters. So I actually had some progress from that day. I went from nothing to 1.5. So they were like, okay, we'll see. Your contractions are 5 minutes apart. And they were, like, on the monitor, they were going like the mountains, every 5 minutes. When before I was in false labor, they were really like not really there. Um, so so we didn't know if I was going to stay or not. She's like, I'm not sure. Drink these fluids in case you're just dehydrated. You were supposed to be here on the 22nd for induction. Okay, let's see. So she's like, all right, the doctor wants me to just let you rest a couple hours, and I'll check you again, see if you've made progress. So I rested there, and we went to the hospital at 1 a.m. So it was pretty late. She came back like an hour and a half later and checked me again, and I was at 3 centimeters. So let me see here. I'm looking at my notes. Okay, so also, just so you guys know what I experienced my contractions felt like when I knew to go to the hospital was the tightening of the belly like a Braxton Hicks, but really intense, and pain like a menstrual cramp like you've never had before in your lower stomach all the way to your back, and where feel like you have to hold your breath, and there's rectal pressure too, like total pressure down there. I totally felt like the baby was right down there, and it was rectal pressure, which is weird, but and that's how my contractions were the whole time. There's tons of butt pressure. So anyways, when she came back in after I was at the hospital for an hour and a half and she checked me again, I was at 3. So they admitted me. They decided to admit me when they saw that I was making progress. So they started my IV and stuff because at this point, even though I've been very like firm on I don't want any medications or any pain meds or anything, I want all natural, you really don't know how you're going to feel until you're at that point. And I still was like, she was like, do you want an epidural? And I was like, no, I don't, whatever. And she's like, well, here, I'm going to give you the paperwork so you can sign it, so if you decide later, you don't have to sign it. So I did it. I signed the paperwork, and they have to do an IV if you're ever going to get any medications. So I think I just let them do that. They put the IV in me, and they started fluids, and I guess you have to go through like a bag or two before you can even get an epidural. But my contractions started getting so painful, and I refused the epidural at first. And then she told me I could take this pain med through the IV. I don't know what it was called. I think it was Stadol. Maybe that's wrong. I have a feeling it started with an A. But anyways, it was one of those pain meds you can take. So I gave in. I was working so hard. I was in labor for like 5 hours at this point, and I was like, okay, I'll try a little bit of that medication to see how that helps. They kept saying it'll take the edge off, but you'll still feel stuff. So they gave it to me, and what it did to me was it made me fall asleep, and it was amazing because I could sleep. And I loved it, but it didn't make me high. It didn't take the pain away. Like, I remember sleeping and feeling the contraction, but I didn't have to grip onto anything anymore. I could totally relax and breathe through it. Sleeping, halfway sleeping, I guess. That's what it did to me, and I loved it. But then I was like, what exactly is this doing to my baby? And they're like, it doesn't do anything wrong to your baby. We wouldn't give you anything that would harm your baby. All it would do is make your baby sleepy, like you, because it goes to your bloodstream, which will go through the baby. But the epidural will not do that. It does not affect the baby at all whatsoever. It doesn't go through their bloodstream. doesn't go through your bloodstream, just blocks your nervous system or your spinal whatever to your legs. And so I was like, okay, I guess the epidural is better than what I just took. So anyway, so I didn't take any more of that medication, but I was able to sleep a little bit more. And my contractions were so bad, I kept gripping the hospital bed and going breathing really, really, really hard, and like I couldn't believe the amount of pain it was. But you know, there's an end to them. Mine would last, I guess, a minute. The nurses were all shocked because after all these hours, my contractions were really intense and big, but they would remain at 5 minutes. They never got closer together, but I was still progressing. You know, I was at 1.5, then 3. Then finally the doctor came in to see me and he checked me and I was at 5. And I was sort of still sleepy at this point. And when he was checking me, it was cool to see a doctor because I was just with the nurses up till this point. And it was one of my Dr. Rudolph at my office, and he's really nice. Anyways, he checked me and he was like, she's at a 5, and he broke my water. I didn't even know what he was doing. He didn't tell me he was going to do that. He just did it. And I felt all this big warm gush down the butt and on the bed. And he was telling the nurse to look and that it was slight meconium. So it's very slight green colored, which means baby had a slight bowel movement. So they said it wasn't a big deal. I started like getting nervous, but they said it wasn't a big deal at all. I didn't even have to worry about it or be on any antibiotics or anything like that. So whatever. Then the nurses started offering me the epidural again because they noticed how much pain I was in, and they're like, it's only going to get worse now that he broke your water and you're at 5. Things are going to start going really fast. And that idea to me that it was going to get more painful than it already was not acceptable. And I was working so hard. I think I was in labor for 10 hours and I was only at 5. So I gave in. I said I will take the epidural, and I worked really hard and was in a lot of pain, and you know, I just felt better about it, and I took the epidural. So what happened with that was that the anesthesiologist came in and he got me all prepped up, and he stuck it in my back, and the epidural didn't really hurt, but what was annoying was I had to get stuck 5 times. The anesthesiologist tried, and he's like, oh, got the wrong spot, got to do it again. So he did it again, and then after that time he failed, he wanted to call the specialist in. So the specialist came in, and actually he did it 3 times, the anesthesiologist, before he called the specialist person in. The specialist person in came, and he put it in once and didn't get it, and then figured I have frontal scoliosis, which is a crooked back, slightly, which I kind of knew I always had, but anyways, it was giving them a hard time. Finally, on the 5th time, the specialist's 2nd time, he got it. And right when they administered the medication, once they had the, whatever you call it in my back, the big tube or whatever, it felt like warmth going down my spine into my legs. It was a nice feeling. And I thought for some reason it was going to feel like your feet fall asleep and that tingly, annoying feeling. It wasn't like that. It was like this warm, nice feeling, and my legs just kind of was really warm, and I laid down on my back and they just slowly got numb. My legs, my hips didn't get numb or anything like that, but it made the contractions feel better, but I totally still felt them completely. But it wasn't painful. It was just the pressure. Like it just felt like Braxton Hicks, really strong Braxton Hicks after the epidural. Whereas before it was the pain plus the Braxton Hicks feeling. So it definitely took the pain away, but it was pressure. And my epidurals would only last for like an hour and a half, and I would have to have them come back because the little pusher thingy that you can minister more on you does nothing at all. So I had to get that done twice. Okay, I'm gonna have to do a part 3. My gosh, it's getting so long. So I'll see you guys in part 3.